know who Stephen King is. So I'm not going to say anything more than that, except to say that he's authored more than 50 novels and has sold over 1/3 of 1 billion copies. Rather extraordinary achievement for anyone. So with that, I think you're going to say a few words, Steve?
I'm going to say a few words, but I'm just going to say a few. One of the reasons that it took me so long to come over to this side of the Atlantic as a public person is because it's sort of shameful that you all speak my language and I don't speak yours. It makes me feel like a class dunce, actually, a little bit. But the other thing was, I was sort of curious to see if there would be any reaction at all. I'm amazed that all you people are here, but you know, for years, old American rockers have come to Europe and have got a warm welcome, so I thought maybe an old American writer could come over here and get the same sort of reaction. But it's great anyway, and I really appreciate it. And a lot of people have asked me about the sort of stuff that I write, and don't ask me where I get my ideas because I don't know. But obviously I got a reputation somewhere along the way as a horror writer. I was in a supermarket in Florida last year, and I came around the corner and there was an old lady who was pushing a shopping cart. She was bent over with the scoliosis, and she said, "I know who you are, you're Stephen King. You write those horror books." "Well, I don't care for those horror books," she said. "I like uplifting things like that Shawshank Redemption." And I said, "I wrote that," and she said, "No, you didn't." So I guess that you'll call me what you want to call me, but it's great to be here, and I'm jet lagged out of my friggin' mind, but if you have questions, I'll do my best to answer them. Jim,
we have an old tradition here that the members of the executive council get to ask the first questions. So you are primarily known, I guess, as a horror writer. A speculative fiction, I guess, is one of the ways they put the sort of futuristic, to include the futuristic and sci-fi aspects of what you do. But let me ask you a question I've wondered about as I've read some of your things. As someone who is a master at creating horrifying situations, what's the worst, most horrifying way to die?
Well, you know, there was a, you might have to help me here, but there was a health food writer some years ago, not Ewell Gibbons, he was the fruit and vegetables man, but there was another guy who is a promoter of healthy living, who went on one of the late night talk shows. It happened to be the Dick Cavett show back in the day, and he died on the air. And I think really the worst way I can think to go out would be, you know, if I just suddenly had a heart attack right here. Now, if one of you guys had a heart attack, that would be material.
Okay, so we can maybe start straight now our Q&A session. So we have questions here, Jim and I, we have a list of questions which have been put by different friends over here. But we can start. Who wants to put the first question in the auditorium? Okay, go ahead, sir. Sam, before you start your question, tell who you are.
Okay. My name is Gorion Delpature. I'm a journalist for the Belgian television and a long-time fan, a book reviewer too. I would like to know, when you wrote Shining in 1977, you had problems with alcohol, and alcohol was the main character of your book. Now, in Docteur Sleep, alcohol is also a main character, but I think that you are drinking Coca Light and not Budweiser. You don't have any more problems with alcohol. Is it easier to talk about alcohol when you're an alcoholic or when you're sober?
Well, I think that it's that a lot of people. I had to look at that to make sure it wasn't a Bud Light. Actually, it's a Coke Light. I think it's all right to write about both ends of alcoholism. There's certainly no reason why you can't write about alcohol and alcohol addiction as an active alcoholic. Malcolm already did it in Under the Volcano. So I think in some ways it's tougher to write about recovery from alcohol because nobody wants to make it sound like Rebecca of Sunnybrook Farm. Nobody wants to give the impression that it's all a Hallmark card of sweetness and light. But when I wrote The Shining, I was drinking heavily, whether or not I was an alcoholic is a judgment that I don't try to make. But I certainly knew the subject of alcohol. And all those years later, the driving force behind Doctor Sleep, I didn't really want to write a tract on alcoholism. I had no interest in that whatsoever. What I wanted to do was reconnect with Danny Torrance, the little boy from The Shining. And I felt that because alcohol addiction is something that tends to run in families, that I would go ahead and let him be an alcoholic and see if he could do a better job than his dad.
Question from where are you from?
I'm from China, the Modern Weekly. And very nice to meet you, Mr. Stephen King. And in your fiction, and the supernatural power is one of the most frequent elements. And back to the reality, I'm wondering if you really believe it existed. If you believe so, what kind of power you want to equip yourself? Thank you.
If I could have any superpower, like psychic power, what would I like to have? Well, all of them. I'm not sure I would really want to have any. The Shining in that book and in Doctor Sleep is kind of the ability to read minds and know what people are thinking, but I'm not sure that I'd always want to do that because, you know, there's an old English proverb, peep not through a knothole, lest you be vexed. And I think that if you could hear people's thoughts when they concern you, you might not always hear things that you wanted to hear. So I'm not sure I'd want that. The one power that Danny Torrance has as somebody who shines, and Amber Stone and Dr. Sleep, that I would like to have now that I think about it, is the ability to find lost things. Because I could never find my keys. You know what? I can't find the mustard in the refrigerator. My wife says that men suffer from refrigerator blindness. It's a disease where, you know, you'll look and you say, honey, I can't find that damn yogurt. And she comes out and it's right there in the everything. So I would like to be able to do that. And really, my wife is the one who usually loses things, so I could use that. But the other things, the ability to make people do things, like Carrie White or Amber Stone in this book, I don't think I want to have those. That's too much power for a normal person.
Go ahead.
Joan Shore, the Huffington,
Joan Shore.
Joan Shore, the Huffington Post. Mr. King, as a long-time professional journalist, I'm very concerned about the so-called citizen journalists now, the pseudo-journalists who with an iPad and a camera are putting recklessly anything on the internet. And I'm wondering now with the self-publishing industry, whether we're not going to have a lot of citizen novelists or pseudo-authors who will be flooding the world with a lot of bad writing. How do you feel about that?
Interesting question. Did you all hear it? Yes, no? Don't hear it? Well, I care. We have citizen novelists, and we have, you know, DIY novelists right now. The 50 Shades books came out of self-publishing. I think that they started almost as Twilight fan fiction. And there are some other books that have hit the New York Times bestseller list that are, you know, sort of what I would call mommy porn, that were self-published, and they do well on Amazon. The thing about self-publishing and going through the bookstores is that there are no gatekeepers. There's nobody to stop you and say, you don't really want to do that because it's rife with the passive tense and because it's full of cliches and your grammar is awful, that sort of thing. And they just slap it up there, and there it is. So I think that it's a case of caveat emptor, let the buyer beware. You can usually, if you go online, you can read a sample, but there's nothing to be done about it, essentially, other than a reading public that is interested in quality, and obviously, not everybody is interested in quality, because the 50 Shades books are frankly not very good. And at the same time, they're wildly successful, and publishing is a business. I don't know if that fully answers your question, because I don't think that I have an answer.
Next. Next here.
Hello. Hi, I'm from France. I'm from French TV. I have a question
Which
about...
TV?
France 5.
Oh, okay.
France 5. France 5. I have a question about Carrie, your first novel being published, and it's also the novel that has been the most adapted. There were 2 movies, 1 TV movie, there was 1 musical, and there's a new movie coming out in France in December. And I was curious, why do you think that? Do you think, why is it so appealing today? Do you think that Carrie has become a part of the American culture? Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think Carrie has become a part of the American culture. I'm not sure I know why. And the remake of the movie didn't do well in the United States. Didn't do terribly, but it didn't do well. There is a sort of fairy tale quality to Carrie. It was an early book. It was actually supposed to be a short story. At that time, I'd had a lot of success. Well, not a lot of success, but I had some success selling short fiction to men's magazines. You know, girly magazines, the ones with the gatefolds in the middle. They've pretty well been superseded these days by the internet, but in those days, they paid a little bit of money anyway. And anything from 2,500 words to 5,000 words would, you know, it would cover the rent for a month, or it would cover the baby's penicillin, amoxicillin, whatever. And Carrie was supposed to be one of those stories, and it started to grow a little bit, and I got the idea because I'd known a couple of girls like Carrie White. One is a student who was at the bottom of the pecking order, and one is a teacher in the same situation. And as it happened, the first girl, the one that I knew was a high school student, killed herself. She hung herself. And the second one was killed by a car crossing the street from the tavern where she had gotten drunk. These were not happy girls, and I thought just once it would be great to see the worm turn, to see one of these bullied, unhappy, downtrodden kids get their own back. And so I started to write the story, and I really didn't know anything about the beginning of the story, the girls' locker room, and I remember going to my wife and saying, well, these tampons that the girls use, do they get them free, or is it like a Coke machine where you have to put in money to get one out? And she just laughed at me, and she said, let me help you with this, because I've thrown the little manuscript away. But you're right, it's been done as a movie a couple of times. It's been done as a musical, a big Broadway musical, and then one off-Broadway that was considerably more successful, I understand. I'm waiting for Carrie the Puppet Show. Or possibly Carrie versus Children of the Corn, or something like that. I think that would be good. I'd put my money on Carrie.
You know, Stephen, you were talking...
Jim, you want to pick up some questions?
You were talking about the American culture, and I'm just curious what you would have to say about transference from fiction to reality, or reality to fiction. Is it that vicious and horrifying fiction and electronic games and whatnot inspire crimes, or do crimes inspire fiction?
Well, that's like asking which came first, the chicken or the egg. I think that there are people who are set up, who tick away like time bombs, who are going to create violent acts, and one way or the other, and I think that a lot of them take certain concrete inspiration from violent films, violent TV programs. And there's a lot of violent TV in America right now. A lot of violent TV. And from books too. But if they didn't have a specific book or movie, they would find a different way to create these horrors. I mean, this has been on my mind because I have a book coming out next year called Mr. Mercedes, which is about a character who's planning an attack very much like what happened at the Boston Marathon. And I finished the book around the same time of the marathon bombing. So, in a sense, what your question comes down to is, does life imitate art or does art imitate life? And the answer is both things are true.
I will take one question before we go to our friends here in the audience. One question from Lucas Neves, the Brazilian journalist, Mr. King. With so many movie and TV adaptations of your work, one wonders what effect that might have had on your writing process, and do you feel that over the years you have started telling stories in a more cinematic style, crafting scenes that best suit grand mise en scène?
No, it didn't, and it doesn't, it never crosses my mind when I'm writing a story that this might make a great movie or this might make a long-form TV show or, no, it doesn't. But, let me say this. I'm 66 now, and I am of the first generation that grew up without TV in the home. I went to the movies. I loved the movies. I absolutely adored the movies from the time that I saw Bambi when I was 3 years old. So that when TV did come in, there's a tendency when you begin with movies as a child to see things visually. And for me, that was reinforced in college. I read a lot of poetry, and it was very, very it was impressed on me that the idea was to show things and not tell things, that the image mattered more than a lot of preaching. So, you know, the poem by William Carlos Williams about the plums in the refrigerator, do you know that poem? It's the form of a note to the partner where she says, I'm sorry I ate the plums in the refrigerator, but they were so cool. And to me, that sort of sums up what fiction is supposed to do. In other words, it's not supposed to be a storyboard, it's not supposed to be a comic, but it is supposed to give you a visual experience. And if you have a visual experience, you're having an emotional experience. And I like that. I'm a novelist of the emotions. I care about your brain, you know, as the bishop said to the chorus girl. But I want to reach you emotionally first. You know, I want to sort of have that tactile close-up. I want to make your flesh creep. I want to make your pulse race. I want to make your eyes tear up, that sort of thing. And then if you come back to the book a second time, you can say, well, what was this about? But to do that, you have to kind of visualize it. So the movies were a big influence on me, and they were a big influence on my writing, but it was never a case of saying, I want to write this book so that it will be a movie. If you do that, the things have to drop in anyway.
Next question.
Hi, I'm Gabor from Hungary, from Magyar Narancs. My question is, do you still write to heavy metal? Because you wrote in your book Writing, you write to Metallica.
You're asking, do I still write to heavy metal?
Yeah.
Man, I used to play rock music. My hearing is shot, let's put it that way, you know, because the louder the better, and the rougher the better. And I used to write, when I used to compose that way, a lot of times I was pretty loaded when I did it. But these days, I usually write in silence and rewrite with a lot of metal playing. I wouldn't say that it's all metal. That wouldn't be fair. Yes, I like AC/DC. I like Metallica, Judas Priest, Anthrax. A lot of metal bands that I like. But I also like James McMurtry and John Prine and people who are sort of on the alt country side.
Yes, but
Yeah,
hello.
how are you?
Ah,
I am at the back.
Okay.
Hello.
Pascal
yes,
from
Pascal
France.
Deschamps from France. Two very simple questions. I was very happy to read about Danny Torrance again. I wanted to know, you mentioned it very quickly at the beginning, why you wanted to reconnect with Danny so many years after creating him.
Well, he had such a rough childhood. She asked about Danny Torrance and why come back to him. He never really left my mind because I'm thinking to myself, here's a little kid who grew up in an abusive household with a father who broke his arm and was always on the hair trigger of violence, and the kid knows it. And he was also an alcoholic, a child of an alcoholic. You know, in the language of today, that makes him a codependent. And I read a definition of a codependent. A codependent is a person who, if they're drowning, someone else's life flashes before their eyes. And so, you know, I've known a lot of people, and I think we all have, who may say, well, I grew up in a family where dad beat mom, or dad beat mom and me and the other kids, or I grew up in a family where dad would come home drunk and we had to tiptoe around him because he was apt to be ugly and mean and that sort of thing. And they would finish by saying, I will never do that. And then they find themselves at 21, you know, with a drink in their hands and getting in bar fights. The past has a tendency to repeat itself. And so I thought to myself, I want to see what's going on with this kid as a grown-up and what happened to his shining. I got curious, and that doesn't happen to me very often. Usually, you know, when I get to the end of the story, I'm done with those people because, not because I don't like them anymore, but because I don't know what happens next. I would love to know what happens next to Lacey Landon in Lacey's story, but I don't. So little by little, the story of Doctor Sleep and what happened to Danny started to form in my head, and eventually the book was a result.
We've got a question here, Stephen, from Juri Vuorotama, a Finnish journalist. I'm probably killing his name. He says that the story goes that you spent a night in Stanley Hotel's room 217 in Colorado way back in 1974 and got the inspiration for The Shining after some ghostly incidents.
Well, that's bullshit. That's totally bullshit. Yeah, no, is it truth or is it bullshit? It's bullshit. But it was the Stanley Hotel. But there were no ghostly happenings of the sort that this journalist is talking about. It was a ghostly experience. And what happened was, my wife and I had a little girl when we were married, and we had a little boy who came along shortly after that, who's now Joe Hill, who writes his own novels, and I'm very proud of him. He's a terrific guy, but of course I would say that anyway, because I'm his dad. But what I'm trying to say is we had children young, and our honeymoon was a weekend in Boston, which we could ill afford. So 4 years into the marriage, we hadn't had any time off. And we were living in Colorado. I was writing really nothing in particular at that point. And we had my wife's younger sister with us as sort of an au pair. And she said, why don't you guys take the weekend for yourselves and just go somewhere, and I'll take care of the kids. So we got in the car and we went up the mountains, you know, and we came to this beautiful hotel in Estes Park, the Stanley Hotel. And we were very much fish against the current because everybody else was checking out and we were checking in. And I asked if we could stay the weekend, and the lady said, you can stay if you can pay cash. We sent all our credit card slips back to Denver. And I had traveler's checks for the weekend, so we stayed, and we were the only guests of the hotel. And it was creepy, because the wind was howling outside, and we went into the dining room, and all the chairs were up on the table, and the music was piped in, and it was very, very strange. And, we had some wine, and we had a nice dinner, as nice a dinner as you can have when you're in this huge dining room and there's nobody else there. And my wife went back to the room, and I stayed and soaked up the atmosphere a little bit, and then I started back to the room where we were staying, and I passed one of those old canvas fire hoses on the wall, and I thought, gee, what if that turned into a snake and came after me? And by the time that I got back to our room, I had the whole book in my head, but there were no ghosts or anything, but it was a very interesting and ultimately profitable weekend.
Next question? Okay. go ahead.
Hello, Alexandre Poncet from Mad Movies Magazine. Thanks for being here, really.
Thank you.
I've got two short questions. You only directed one feature film in your career. Did you ever want to do another? And do you still write one short movie every year, like you explain in Everything Eventual?
Do I write every day of the year? Was that the question?
Every year you explain in the introduction a short novel, a short story.
Well, they come when they come. There's no real rhyme or reason for it. I've been fairly fortunate in terms of being able to put together a lot of stories. They don't come as frequently as they used to be. When I was in my 20s and 30s, I always used to feel like my head was jammed with ideas. It was as if somebody yelled fire in a crowded theater, because I had a lot of stuff going on. And now, having said that, I completely forgot the other half of your question.
You directed one movie in your career. Did you want to do another one in your career?
If I could direct another movie, oh man, yes, I'd love to do it. It was a Maximum Overdrive, a terrible movie. But you have to keep in mind that when I did it, I was working with an all-Italian film crew and we didn't understand each other. I was drunk or stoned for most of the time, but mostly I had no film experience. And so the whole film was like this high-pressure tutorial. And I think I could probably do a better job the next time, but who knows? It would be fun to try it again, though. Yeah.
Next in the bottom here.
Hello, I'm Stefan Alix from Inres and in Explorer magazine. It seems that you're very familiar with the psychic experience and this world of supernatural. And in the book, Dan, at one moment, is taking care of that lady who is passing away. I was wondering, what do you think is happening when we are dying?
Well, I'm more interested in the actual experience of dying than I used to be because I'm closer to it than I used to be. It seems a lot less like an academic subject to me than it did a few years ago. I was talking to my wife the other day and mentioning to her that there's a song by Paul Simon on the album Bookends where there's a lyric that goes, "How terribly strange to be 70. And Paul Simon is now 72, so take that, Paul, how strange. So, you know, and of course the Beatles went on 64, which probably seemed like an academic idea to them now. Paul McCartney, my wife calls him old dog eyes. He's older than God at this point, so, you know, that does happen. So, I'm interested in the subject of dying, but also there's a universality to it. It's the one thing that we all go through, every one of us. There are no exceptions. The only other thing that we all go through, I think, is birth. And after that, it's all up for grabs. But we've all seen birth, and we've all experienced it, and we've lived through it. Nobody's ever come back to talk about the actual death experience. So it's a mystery, and mysteries interest me, so I've written about that, and I guess in an effort to understand it to some degree. Yeah.
Next. We are waiting for here. Okay.
My name is Alexa Horáčková and I'm writing for Czech Daily. Would you mind speculating what would happen if your wife didn't pick up your manuscript of Carrie from the garbage?
I don't know. Frankly, I don't know what would have happened. That was a very fortuitous occurrence. At the time that she picked that manuscript out of the trash and brushed out the cigarette ashes from it, we were living in a two-room apartment. We had no phone, and the book got finished and it got sent out to Doubleday, and the advance on the book was very, very tiny. And about 6 months after it was accepted and about 2 or 3 months before it was published, my editor from Doubleday called and said, "We've sold the paperback rights to your book." And I said, "Well, that's terrific. How much did you get?" And he said, "We got $400,000. And I said, $4,000? Because that figure at least made sense to me. You know. He said, no, $400,000, and the strength went out of my legs, and I sat down on the floor between the living room and the dining room of the house where he called me. And I was just stunned. You know, it was like winning the lottery, except when you win the lottery, you don't really do anything except buy a ticket, and I had at least written this book, so I'd done the work. And it was Sunday, and I was in my little town, and the only thing that was open, I thought to myself, I have to buy my wife a present, because she rescued this book. I must buy my wife a present. My God, we just made $400,000. You know, I was living at that point on $6,400 a year. We were supporting a family of 4. And I thought, I have to get her something. I must. But nothing's open. But the Rexall drugstore was open, so I bought her a hair dryer. It was the only thing I could think of. But the one thing that I remember most clearly is she had been visiting her mother that day, and she came back in our old wreck of a car. And I said, they sold the paperback rights for $400,000. We're relatively rich. And there was this sort of expression of stark incredulity on her face, and then her eyes filled up with tears, and she just put her hands over her face and wept. And I thought, God, I made a lot of money and I made my wife cry. What could be better than that?
You know, I think you said at one point that if you're not writing or reading 4 to 6 hours a day, you really can't call yourself a writer. And one of the things that's most remarkable about it is how prolific you are. I mean, you must be working on more than one thing at once. And does that ever lead to any confusion when you have different storylines going on in your brain?
No, not really. I've got a pretty clear head about what I'm doing, and I'm usually only working on one thing at a time. When I have to work on 2 things at once, it makes me crazy. I hate that. Sometimes it's necessary, but I don't like it. And really, I mean, guys, you're all writers, you're all communicators of some form or another, and you know, you can call yourself anything you want, right? Everybody does. You call yourself an expert, you get on CNN. Oh, snap! So, you know, you can do that, but you can't do it well. You can't really do it well unless you spend a certain amount of time working with craft. Simple as that. Like anything else.
I have 2 questions from Denmark, from Svein Aristrup, and one from South Korea, South Jun-yoon, about JFK. First one is, how is writing historical fiction different from straight fiction? And the second one is, what is the reason for choosing the assassination of JFK to develop the story? Do you think, oh my God, it would have been better for America and the world if he had not been killed?
Oh God, that's a whole wax. I wanted to write about it because I think that it's one of those rare moments when everything either changes or it doesn't. And it's one of those rare cases where somebody takes a place on the world stage and makes a huge change, who isn't a politician, who isn't a scientist, who isn't a Nobel Prize winner, who isn't a world leader. This was just some little schmuck, right, who worked as a glorified janitor in a book repository, and he happened to be there that day. He happened to have a little bit of experience as a shooter. He happened to be in the right place. It happened that day that the rain that had been forecast didn't come, so instead of Kennedy being in the closed car, he was in the open car. All of these things came together. It isn't the first time that it's happened, and it won't be the last, but the conspiracy theories ignore the fact that sometimes people just get lucky and the rest of us get cataclysmically unlucky and things change. So I was fascinated by that choke point in history, and not just American history, world history, because at that time our involvement in Vietnam was escalated. At that time the civil rights movement had started to gain force and gain speed. And Kennedy was the guy. After he died, some things changed for the worst. Lyndon Johnson went into Vietnam with that sort of Texas, you know, like my balls are bigger than your balls kind of thing, you know, and we're going to kick them asses, you know. That was one thing. On the other hand, he used the slain president to advance the civil rights agenda at a speed that never would have been considered possible, I don't think, before that time. So all those things fascinated me, and the question of what would have happened if Kennedy had lived fascinated me as well. As far as writing historical fiction, it's too much like work. You know, you have to tell the truth about all the background if anybody's going to believe the fictional foreground. And that's not easy. I had a research assistant. I hired a guy that I'd known for a long time to work out some things and get me basically information, but then I have to winnow it for the stuff that matters. And I had to go to Dallas and go to the 6th floor window, and there are people who do this book after book, and I just don't understand why. Those Hilary Mantel books, Wolf Hall and Bring Up the Bodies, amazing feats. The Orphan Master's Son, a novel about North Korea, fantastic feat of imagination melded with actual facts. See what I'm saying? So it was interesting, and it was a challenge, and it gave me a chance to build fictionally on real people like George de Mohrenschildt, who was a shadowy figure in Oswald's background. I don't want to get all technical about this because I'll bore the butts off you guys, but it was a process, I'll tell you, and it was interesting. I love that book.
Next question. Here, we already put one. Okay,
Yeah,
go
I think
ahead.
it's here. Hello, my name is Maria Bravikova, Russia 24, Moscow, Russia, TV. Right, so in Russian language we have a set expression "чемодан без ручки," a suitcase. You cannot see me, right? It's a suitcase without a handle, something that is really heavy, really hard to carry around, but you still cannot throw it away. And I think same thing goes with bad memories, traumatizing experiences, and everything like that. And when we start reading 11/22/63, we all already know that Kennedy was assassinated, but we still are expecting for something good just because you are so good at writing happy endings, right? And
Well, maybe you haven't read Pet Cemetery, that's where the wife comes back.
probably thinner is the worst.
I've done some happy endings. I think in life there are more happy endings than sad ones, but that's just me.
Do you think the novel has an optimistic ending, and do you think it's ever possible to mend the suitcase?